guys, thanks for checking out this video. This one is going to be all about the diminished sound on mandolin. So it's a really common sound in jazz songs, any style of jazz and even other styles of music. This is going to be about the diminished scale, diminished arpeggios and chords, and where you can find that on the mandolin neck. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe and you'll be aware of more videos coming out on my channel in the future. Thanks. We're going to be talking about the diminished scale, arpeggio, and chords that you can make from that scale and arpeggio. The diminished is a repeating interval, so it's a pattern. I'm going to show you using the example of C natural. So we're going to build a C diminished arpeggio starting from there. So the interval would be a minor third. And when you hear people say a minor third, that basically means that if you were playing a minor scale, then the third is flat, right? So that's the interval. It's like from that 1 to the flat 3. Well, that just so happens like if you were playing like a C minor scale, it would be E flat. So that's basically 3 half steps up. So a minor third interval. So the fact is, the diminished arpeggio is a repeating interval. You got the minor third, that C up to an E flat, and then a minor third above that would be an F sharp or a G flat, and then a minor third above that would be an A. And then if I kept going, so I've already got 4 notes in that arpeggio. If I kept going, I make it to C again, so the next octave of C. So if you think about the numbers really quickly, if you have a chromatic scale, there's 12 tones, there's 12 notes in a chromatic scale. So if we're doing this interval, basically where there's 3 notes apart, there's 3 half steps up to the next interval, so a minor third, that means that we've got 4, we can do that 4 times because 3 times 4 would give us 12, the number of notes in a chromatic scale. Now if I kept going, so that's what the diminished sounds like, and I just did 2 octaves of that arpeggio. Now on mandolin, the thing that I want you to notice that makes it really easy to visualize this and basically reproduce the diminished arpeggio anywhere, I'm going to play this interval. I'm using my 3rd finger to get that minor third interval, so up to an E flat. Now I can do the same thing over on the next string, so on the D string, but I'm going to move it down a fret, so closer to the headstock. Same thing. I just go over a string and then I go back a fret. So what that looks like is now check this out. I can take that same thing, that same pattern, and since we've talked about how that's essentially it's just a repeating pattern with that minor third interval, if I'm here, I can take this up a minor third, right? It's just the next couple notes in that where we are like in that arpeggio, and I can do the same pattern and the same fingering, and it's just kind of the next area of the neck where we're doing that repeating pattern. So another detail is that we've been saying that we started with the C natural, right? With a C natural. So we're technically doing like a C arpeggio, C diminished arpeggio. But the truth is that basically you could start anywhere in that pattern. You could start on any note of that arpeggio and then call it, let's say the next one, we could be an E flat. We could call it an E flat diminished because it's the same pattern no matter where you're starting. It's that minor third interval. So like if the chart says play a C diminished or play an E flat diminished or play a an F sharp or G flat diminished or play an A diminished, those are all really the same sound. Now I will say that the key difference is that if it specifically says that it's like an E flat diminished, that just means that there's an E flat in the bass. So now that we've looked at the diminished arpeggio, I'm going to show you the scale that this comes from. I have to admit that I did learn the scale a little later on, because you can really start doing the diminished sound when you have the arpeggio. You can play your lines, and then when it's time to play over a diminished chord, you can just incorporate a part of the arpeggio and take that approach, and it sounds great. And I still do that a lot. But it's really important to note the diminished scale. So that also comes from it's a repeating pattern, and people call this half whole or whole half, and that's referring to half step, whole step, half step, whole step, or does it start with a whole step and then half step, whole step, half step? So if I were going to show you this one that also has this like C diminished sound, I'm going to say start with your first finger on B, actually, just below the C, and you're going to play a half step. Then you're going to play a whole step to a D, then a half step to an E flat. Then you'll play an F, which is a whole step, and you have the same thing on the next string. So and there I'm doing it on the A string as well. So that's a pattern that's half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half, whole, and so on. So now we've talked about the scale and the arpeggio. I want to show you the chord shape that is really common, or really the best way to do this chord shape on mandolin. So let's say that we're still using the same example of C diminished. We're going to take that arpeggio and we're going to make a chord. So this is actually the same shape that you use oftentimes to do a dominant shape. So A, and then E flat, and then C. That's a great 3-note chord. That's the one I would say I most often use. But then if you wanted to make it with 4 notes, you're just going to put your 4th finger, your pinky, on C, and then your 3rd finger is going to grab that F sharp up there on the E string. Now you can take that same shape and just go up a minor 3rd. So now my 2nd finger is on C. Again. Now the lowest note is an E flat. Again, if I do it there, then that's getting pretty high up the neck, but my lowest note is that F sharp note. So the cool thing about that shape is it's the same shape, and that's why you can just move it up that interval, that minor 3rd. And if you are reading a chart and then it says go to a C diminished, you could automatically have something to work with where you can move it and create some movement. Right? And I will say that oftentimes I am just going for the 3-note version of this chord. Now let's look at some of the really important uses of the diminished in jazz standards. Things chord movements that you're definitely going to encounter that are kind of the most common things that you should be aware of. So if you've heard me talk about 1-6-2-5 before, that's a really important kind of the building blocks of many jazz songs. And if you were in the key of C and you did a 1-6-2-5 movement, that means that you're playing like C major 7 to an A minor 7 to a D minor 7 to a G 7. We're actually going to use the diminished to replace the A minor 7 chord, and there's a couple ways we can do that. There's 2 different diminished chords that work great, so that are really common in jazz, right? So the first example I'll show you is that if you have a C to start out with, then you can go to the C diminished. D minor, G, right? So maybe. So the first example, I was putting my 2nd finger, the lowest note, on A, and then this example, it's basically the same idea, but I'm in this part of the neck, right? So I'm doing a C major 7 here, and then C diminished here, D minor 7, G7. So that's basically what, you could describe that movement as a 1 to 1 diminished, 2 minor 5, or 1 to 3 flat diminished. It could be one of those. Typically, those are the ones you would use to name that movement. But so there's another really great one. I'm going to go 1 to 1 sharp diminished, and that sounds like this. There's my 5. So I go C. That's a diminished shape that's got that C sharp. So 1 to 1 sharp diminished, 2 minor 5. Here it is. So you see, I'm just using this shape, either with the B flat on the bottom, the C sharp on the bottom as the lowest note, or the E as the lowest note. Now this brings me to a really important kind of detail about that diminished and the use of that diminished sound. You could also think about that as an A7, especially like the way I'm playing this voicing. That's basically just an A7 voicing, right? Now, if I made it with that fully, 4-note shape that's got the full diminished, all of the 4 notes of the diminished arpeggio, another way to think about that sound would be like an A7 with a flat 9. And that's a really common sound when you have a dominant chord that also has a flat 9. It turns out an A7 with a flat 9 would be basically, here's an A arpeggio, A7 with a G. If I raise the A to that note, there's my diminished arpeggio. It's basically contained in that sound of a dominant chord with a flat 9. So in that case, like an A7 with a flat 9. Let's say that you're in the key of C and you go to an F. Oftentimes, you'll find this word either goes from an F to an F minor to a C, or you can use the diminished to the 4, to the 4 sharp diminished, to a 1. And that movement that I'm doing there, I'm actually using, it's kind of a different shape than I've shown you so far. I'm putting an A and then an F sharp in a C, because that's just a really great way to do the diminished when you've got an F chord like this, and then just raising the F note to an F sharp like that. But really, it's no different than, it's contained within that same kind of universal shape I showed you before, because if I did this right here, you could just see that same shape as the upper part of the chord. But that's definitely a valid, good use, a good shape you can use as well.